Got him. Okay, that's how I'm gonna start.
Um, Born in the Philippines, actually.
I didn't know.
But but yes, raised in San Diego. I live in Long Beach now, and I moved for the job. But yeah, you got that right. All male, founded Morse All Male. It was the second all male team in San Diego, and then the subsequent years, many teams all over SoCal branched. And I think I didn't realize what that looked like until I looked back a few years ago. But yeah, I joined Formality when I was in high school, my senior year, when I was wrapping up all male.
So was Formality, because you were in it from the outside? I was on the East Coast when Formality was kind of in its stride. That was the coolest place to be as a young man. Is that how it felt on the West Coast?
I think I was so young, and I was still understanding what like the dance community really meant. And there were so few teams anyway. I didn't have a lot of choices post high school. It was honestly either Formality or 220. And I just happened to have friends on Future Shock who told me, you should go audition for Formality. Let's go to Fusion Dance Comp and watch them so you know what you're auditioning for next week. Lo and behold, they won first place at that competition. And I was like, I'm auditioning for that team? Like, are you kidding me? So it was definitely a cool opportunity, but I never felt that way. I was just so eager, hungry to like learn and embrace something outside of like what I knew in high school.
Yeah.
So that was very cool. And then when I was on Formality, I was assisting Eric Saradpan with a lot of his classes because just an eager beaver. And then Angie Bunch offered me my first class at the newly opened Culture Shock Dance Center when it opened in 2003. So shout out to Angie and the whole Culture Shock organization because I never danced for the team, but I've always had such close ties to many of the members, and then their styles influenced me so much as a young dancer. So
I mean, they were huge in the community. We'll talk a little bit about the napkin in a little bit. I think that besides everything else, kind of cements your place in history of being the one that documents part of that. And I would say that besides being a leader in the dance community, you've been a historian, probably one of the few that are vocal about the history, who understand it was there firsthand. And so, a lot of people don't even know Formality anymore, which is unfortunate. I was traveling in Europe, a couple of OGs knew Formality.
Yeah.
But Formality had the heavy hitters, like almost any of your favorite choreographers today has a connection either directly or indirectly to Formality, right? Like,
yeah, that's absolutely true. And again, Formality and Eric heavily, influenced by Culture Shock. So I can't wait to get to the napkin.
Yeah.
But yeah, I joined what I would probably call like the next generation of like young newbies. I joined in 2002, where all of the majority of the original dancers were still on the team, but they were hitting their mid and late 20s and, kind of like the end of their dance journeys, I'd say. And so when I joined, and then the year and 2 years after me, we brought on a very, very young Philip Janizas and Ving Wins and, Will Ortegas and so many other dancers that kind of moved on to, Keonis, that came on and, we all know what happened to them thereafter, but yeah, it was, and even the generations after that, I think about when Formality moved to Temecula a few years later, and then we got the Kevin Wins and the Paul Rosses and the Gerald Georges. So there was Formality certainly helped bring up a lot of great dancers in San Diego.
Stacked so heavy. And then I guess let's kind of segue into the napkin. So anyone who doesn't know, so to me, this was urban legend, right? I mean, that's kind of how it was. Because I was on the East Coast, and I remember getting into dance. My first time starting to train for dance was in Culture Shock DC. right? A lot of my foundation comes out of there. And I think that's why, I mean, especially if you're a little bit older too, you have more chances to get to foundation and different styles. And Culture Shock as a whole organization was pretty consistent across the board with those styles. And I'm so thankful for that. But I heard about the napkin. What is the napkin? How did that night or that day or that event come to happen? And I'll share a screenshot in a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we were blown away at like how far this napkin spread, because at the time, social media surely didn't have the same presence it does today. But so I was on SGBM, or I was directing SGBM at the time, and a good friend of mine, Sean Mamihe, who I danced with since Formality.
And he's amazing.
Yes, one of my oldest and one of my most favorite friends in the dance community. He's still directing Culture Shock San Diego today. So shout out to Sean.
Yeah.
I think we've literally grown up sleepers with a lot of San Diego dancers who never really got to dance together. So we were rehearsing for, I think, a fusion performance. And after rehearsal, we went to get Mexican food. Very San Diego thing to do.
Where'd you go?
I don't even remember the name of it because there's so many awesome Mexican food places.
Real Mexican food, not Tex-Mex?
Yeah, not hating the Tex-Mex, but it just hits differently in San Diego.
I'll go on record. I don't care.
But yeah, we were literally just getting food and just having, dance convos. A lot of the people, there's like 6 or 7 of us who went to get food that night. Many of them, veterans in the community now. But we literally unfolded a napkin from the restaurant with burritos in hand and tacos in hand. Someone pulled out a pen, and I think it started with 2 or 3 of us talking about it. And we were like, I bet if we tried hard enough, we could trace the majority of the dance community teams in SoCal, or even maybe in California. We could trace some sort of line back to Culture Shock, whether it was like a direct branch or like influenced by. And that's what the napkin became. Just so over like a course of an hour eating Mexican food and talking, I think Loveland like scribed it, and we were just spitting out teams. We put Culture Shock in the center, and then we started branching out. And so I think that this was in 2011, by the way. So the napkin's about 9 years old now. But we did like direct lines of influence, and then I think we did dotted lines for some other relation. But we certainly felt like we filled quite a bit of the napkin up. And so it wasn't anything that we were like, we're going to share this or anything. It was just something we did in kind of like the moment, and thought it was really cool because so many of us at the time had been in the community for at least, 6 to 10 years. So it was just kind of a reminder of our own roots, because again, that was a project where a lot of the dancers, we came from different teams, and it's a reminder of our history. And so I posted it on Tumblr at the time, like one of my 3 whole posts on Tumblr.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, that's when it was like kind of cool, but I never really got into it.
Yeah.
I posted it for my own benefit, just kind of like, I want to come back to this one day because it's a really fragile napkin. And I think Loveland or somebody might still have the napkin. But I posted it on Tumblr, and it, for lack of a better word, it went viral on Tumblr. Yeah. And I would see all of these dancers that I had never met. I didn't even know how they found it in the first place because I wasn't following anybody on Tumblr.
Right. And let me say with that too, right? So you weren't following them. Your Instagram to this day, you follow how many people?
That would be a 0, actually. Yeah.
We'll talk about it in a little bit, but I like that though. I think it's actually kind of a good thing. But go ahead. But it's not uncommon for you to not be following dancers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So long story short, social media is a way for me to capture my own memories and moments in time, and not to scroll away or get too engaged on what everybody else is doing. But yeah, I would see these dancers from Future Shock LA, and dancers on Culture Shock DC, and dancers in Canada, and they would just share it, and it became kind of this thing, like a hashtag know your roots thing. And I think that I might have did that hashtag in one of my very long-winded
You used
posts.
hashtags back then?
We did. Yeah, they were actually pretty cool back then, for the record. So
I still don't know how to use them.
yeah. But yeah, and it just kind of blew my mind how quickly that spread amongst the dance community.
It's amazing because even now, looking at the teams and crews that are around now, that napkin, albeit it could probably be 5 or 10 wide now, and it still would trace back to Culture Shock. And I remember seeing the napkin for the first time on a photo, because I've never been able to see it live. Although whoever has it, I'll buy it off you straight up. Yeah. But I seen the napkin, and coming from DC or the East Coast, seeing the teams that I was associated with, or that knew or was able to dance, or take class with, and just seeing that recognition of, okay, that's the first time I realized the dance community was large and small at the same time. And it's been probably one of the things I've loved most about my dance journey is just the ability to meet people all over the world. A great example, I went to Scotland last year, and there's my buddy Chris now, who's one of my really, really good friends, knows about the SGBM documentary, right?
Yeah.
Like he flipped out when he was like, you liked one of my photos on Instagram. You don't follow me. You liked it. And he goes, Jay Vaughn, right? And so it's just so cool all over the world. Those that know the history, who appreciate the history, you got to be a creator in that space with that napkin. But then also you've done it again with the documentary I just mentioned, right? And that's the first time I ever saw your face. I think you were shaved head back then.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that I was going to take the way the napkin did, or that, because X did that, right? X is fantastic too.
Yeah, absolutely. And really that was X's baby, at the time in SGBM, we were kind of like turning a new leaf in terms of leadership, in 2009, when KJ and I were directing, only a year after, Kevin and Ben stepped away to do ABDC with Jabba, KJ got married that year. And so that ended his, full-time status and directing on a team. So Ving got promoted to artistic director.
Now call it what it is.
Huh?
Call it what it is. What's the title?
Overlord.
That's right. That's right. I'm throwing my SGBM shirt.
Yeah, Ving got promoted to Overlord. He certainly deserved an opportunity because, he was just fantastic, choreographer and dancer. And so, when we brought on that next gen, I think it was Gen 5, there was just this new excitement in the air, and X had danced with 220 before and been in the community for some time. And so, he was also exploring his talents in like the media world as well. So he kind of made the choice to, document our journey with the new generation and our kind of decision to go from an exhibition team for 5 years to a journey into competition. So it was a real unique and I think important time in SGBM's history. And he did all the work, to be honest, and he captured it so beautifully. And the video was meant to, again, it was shared. We watched it at our like end of year banquet, and it was meant for us to kind of like rewatch and revisit our journey. It wasn't necessarily meant to go out to the masses, because again, this was like 2011, 2010, 2011. So, we weren't trying to put ourselves out there or market anything, but all the same, I think looking back, there weren't a lot of teams that kind of captured moments in time or moments in their history the same way X did with us. And so, it kind of took off. And when X said like, hey, I want to interview you and interview Ving and really get into the nitty gritty, I was like, yeah, that's really cool. Like, I bet this is going to be great. So it became much more than we thought it would.
Yeah. I watched it again recently, right? Because, and typically, our conversations, or not ours specifically, but for Grown Talk, I don't do a lot of prep work because I've known that person a decent amount of time, or maybe I haven't. I just want the conversation to be more organic. But because you're my big brother, and because there's so much history here, I felt like out of respect I should go back and do a little bit of due diligence, right? And so I watched it again, and shout out to X, because that documentary has aged so well. I mean, the quality of the production itself, let alone the story and the editing, and it's, I got to tell you, one of my favorite experiences on SGBM was, and this is so corny, was when we're in there one day. I think we're stressed out prepping for a show, and someone plays the cha-cha slide.
Yeah.
And I was like, turn the lights off right now. Let's get the disco ball going. Oh my gosh. And it made me so happy. And so my buddy Chris in Scotland, who I was talking about earlier, that's one thing that I got to share with him. Was like, I got to do the cha-cha slide when I was on SGBM.
Freeze! Everybody clap your hands.
Forget dancing on stage for Body Rock, forget going to UP, or getting classes from all the fam and Java and all of us. No, that was one of my favorite memories. And that team is just so special to me, and to you too. You've been there for so long. You're still helping out with SGBM. So let's talk about SGBM history, right? So
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about SGBM and where it stands historically in the San Diego dance community, and then kind of how it forms within FAM.
Yeah, so SGBM was formed in November of 2005. So at the time, there's still just a handful of teams in San Diego. And I think at the time, the community at large is kind of evolving in terms of styles, and, we were growing together, and, the level of intensity and musicality and artistry that exists today just existed in a very different shape and form back then. And so Kevin Brewer of Jabba, no stranger to, I'm sure, anybody listening today. Yeah. So he was obviously on Jabba and has a huge, long history. I got to chat with him on a IG Live a couple of weeks ago. So
he's teaching today, actually. He
is. Yes. He's teaching on the Jabba IG Live
right now?
In about 30 minutes.
I'm being disrespectful. I'm so sorry, KB. Okay. But so he's around.
Yeah, so he had moved down from Sacramento and joined Culture Shock San Diego with Joe Larat. And, after his time with Culture Shock, he would just invite a bunch of dancers to a studio, during the summer months, to just vibe, to get down, a place where he can kind of pour into to dancers. And he enjoyed that so much that he officially decided to start a team. And the other thing that influenced him is, Joe and Phil Tayag are basically his best friends. And Phil started Boogie Monstars in 2003 up in Sac. And then Joe was already kind of working with a group that would eventually become the Press Play that we know. Yeah. But basically KB was a little jealous and wanted to start a team of his own because his best friends had teams. And so, he basically said, I'm going to start a team of my own, and I'm just going to call it the Super Galactic Beat Manipulators. And he did it with so much excitement. We were all like, where did you even pull that name? Where did that name even come from? But he's just kind of he's just a creative genius. And if you've ever had a conversation with him, there's no one else like him. So in November of 2015, officially held auditions. I was dancing for Urban Effects at the time, but KJ Gonzalez, who was my director on Urban Effects, left, and then eventually joined SGBM, along with several other names in the community that were pretty well established. And so I ended up joining what we refer to as Gen 2. We had auditions like 8 months after the first audition, and that's when like Ving and I joined the team as well. So the summer of 2006. But yeah, I mean, I think at the time, looking back on it, I think people were really like inspired by what SGBM was, because it was very different from everything else back in 2005. At the time, the community and like the heavy hitters like Culture Shock and Urban Effects and Funkonometry. I haven't
heard that name ever.
Oh, one of my favorite teams of all time, heavily influenced my style, was Funk's. The three of them, like artistically and the way they express themselves, are very, very different, right? Like Culture Shock, very rooted in hip hop and in those styles, and Urban Effects, which I danced for 2 years, definitely had more of a commercial feel. We definitely danced to more pop music. Our movement was super high energy, very fast, very flashy, meant for like commercial consumption in a lot of ways.
Sure, yeah.
In San Diego, and the other teams like Formality had kind of moved on to Temecula by then. 220 was still very much like a collegiate team doing their thing, very dope. But because of the Jabberwocky like influence, and then just kind of like some of the names that came on board with the first gen SGBM, there wasn't really a team that moved like SGBM, that really like leaned into the musicality and leaned into like instrumentals and really just made it about like the music and the connection to the music versus doing something for showmanship.
Right.
Because by then, like Culture Shock had produced some super iconic sets, like what we refer to as like the Asian medley, and several others that, just jaw droppers. And so SGBM fit something very different at the time, and at the time, certainly there was room for that, and so we just got a lot of love from the community about what that was, and so much so that dancers from LA, like Ben Chung and April Rodriguez and Gina Liu and Toby Vu, who were all like active dancers at the time, would literally carpool down from LA to come to SGBM rehearsals. And
that's a drive, because I tried it for a little bit when I first moved back to LA.
Yeah.
That's, 2.5, 3 hours, depending on which studio we're at and all that. And it's a commitment. And SGBM, I would agree 100%, has its own style, has its own flavor. Musicality was a big one. And I would say my ear has never been as sharp as when I was on that team, and it all made sense compared to a lot of other places that I've danced with, and it felt so natural. And KB is a weird genius, that he is. And I mean that with the most respect. And so what's interesting to me about that story is KB and the boys are all established by then. They're well known, right?
Yeah.
Or, they have their own recognition. They had their team, right? Jabba, who's fantastic. And they decide to, instead of, having another separate group, that they're each going to have their own teams, right? Like we had 3 leaders on that one team who are ready to kind of spawn off. And each one who knows, Boogie, Press Play, and SGBM, anyone who knows FAM knows that these are 3 distinctly different teams under one umbrella. And I had no idea even the history of it until I got on SGBM and we got to go up to SAC, for UP. And I got to, sit down and talk to people from both teams. And it's just, to me, it sounds like KB needed to fill a void, right? Like not even just in himself, but in the dance community, like there was a place to go for them. So back then, was there any pushback on having your own team or building a new team? Or what was the community response, on that? And is it any different than it would be today? Because I know today is a little bit different if you want to start your own team. depending if you have something to say or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't a question that comes up very often. So I'm glad you asked that. And then certainly this is, my perspective on this, having grown up in the community during that era. But yeah, and I wouldn't say KB was necessarily trying to fill a void. I think he kind of just acknowledged what he was trying to do would eventually would fill a space that others weren't necessarily exploring. And on top of that, like really inspired the other overlords. Lando Wilkins heavily influenced our first, 2 years on the team.
Yeah, those sets were definitely blocked, choreographed differently, right? I mean, Lando was very, very artistic and heavy in his direction.
Yeah, and a part of it was because KB had to step away for 6 months because his first child was born and he wanted, dad time. And so, yeah, I know, right?
Can't relate.
Lando kind of took the helm artistically, and and KJ and Ben contributed, but they were like some of the hardest pieces I'd ever learned, and they weren't they weren't blocked intricately or what you see today with kind of like all the visuals, because the movement and expectations for execution were so high, you couldn't travel 10 feet with a piece without compromising the integrity of, the execution.
Yeah.
So, shout out to the original 4 overlords for really just like weaving through that time. Because it really like launched who we would become, for the next decade or so. But going back to the like fam royale ties, and I think at this point, everybody's seeing the way Phil moves. I love that he's got so much shine. Yeah, he's one of the most unique movers I have ever seen, still to this day.
Yeah.
And we're about the same age now. And so I met him when we were, like 20 years old, maybe. And he's had that. That's been his like distinct way of moving.
He's such a G.
Oh my god!
Like that's just like that's the only way I can put it is he's just. I don't like using the word swag. I think he just has a G. Like he just has his own flow on him, and it translates down to Boogie, right?
Yeah, and that was the coolest thing because honestly, and I still think that was untouchable, like that style and truly emulating it. But when I look back on the way that like Boogie Monstars would like conduct rehearsals and like their like real lack of, structure, they were just kind of just doing it and spending as much time as they need to like perfect what they were doing. It was a much more organic process for them than it was like maybe for SGBM. But Phil was able to like successfully get a group of dancers to like emulate, absorb, and replicate that style. And I still think to this day, there's been no other team in the community that's been able to really do that or kind of touch that style in that way. Yeah. Because they were so good at it, like so good at it. And if you haven't watched, I think it was Bust a Groove, Body Rock Bust a Groove. It's either Bust a Groove 05, but it became Body Rock 06. So forgive me, fam, but I think it's Body Rock 06. The first year it became Body Rock. Boogie Monstars won first place.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah. And it wasn't, again, because of any sort of like flash. It was simply because like you just never seen dancers really move like that. And the quality of movement was so beyond at the time that you couldn't do anything but be like in awe of that. So
yeah, I'm getting chills to think about it because, I knew Boogie and I knew Press Play before I got into fam, but only through YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And it's just Boogie specifically and that style, anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about needs to look it up. I'll put a link or something. But like that style specifically, you have to watch it live. You have to be 10 feet from it.
Yeah.
Because then you pick up on the nuances. And at the time coming into the community, I feel like choreography was starting to get really, really fast. Right? Like we were hitting 1E and a 2E and we were like hitting every single sound in there. And it was impressive. It's a skill to have. Anyone who could do that and make it legible is beyond talented, right? It takes a lot of work. But for Boogie, And I guess the overall Java style that kind of comes out of it is so patient, and they pick and choose their moments in a way that to me is more conversational, which is how I grew up in dance, right? It's a conversation sentence, and you figure out where your inflections are at versus speed reading. And it's so dope. But I love that they're still around today.
And in 2020, like Boogie still has the same kind of like, still has the same vibe, the same feel that they did, back in 2003, and they've done such an incredible job passing the torch, artistically and stylistically. And I think that's really hard to do for any team when you think about, at this point, it's 17 years for them. Like that's a testament to like how deep those roots are, not just with Boogie, but with Fam, and Brandon Greathouse, shout out to Brandon up in SAC, really was kind of like the founder of Press Play. And then like Joe and Brandon, and then eventually like Jason Magsusi kind of came together to evolve Press Play to like what it eventually became. And Press Play was like officially established, I think it was like March of 2006, so just 5 months after us. And then we just acknowledged, and it really was Three Muskie, which is Kevin, Joe, and Phil. They really ingrained that in us. They told us the stories. They reminded us why this is important. They validated that these roots are real and that this is family because of the roots and not because of a name, or not because we decided to collaborate. Like the roots, the roots are so deep, and we all took that very, very seriously. And I think that certainly propelled our love for what we do, our love for, dance and the artistic side, along with community, because that meant we had a true dance family, and that helped foster the importance of community beyond maybe what we experience in our own like cities and spaces and studios. But like, even though Press Play and Boogie shared a studio in SAC, like there are sister teams in, from San Diego, they're 500 miles away. And it never was a chore to like stay connected or work together. And we, successfully collaborated on multiple occasions.
One night.
Really a lot of fun and very stressful nights. Every single one of those was worth it. And I, a lot of alumni still talk about how fun those experiences were. So super dope that Fam, and it, like anything else, like it exists in a different capacity and operates a little differently, but like who we are at our core is still very much alive and well. And I think that's the most important.